Hello dear viewers, welcome once again to my new lecture. Today I am going to give lecture on the mixed economy. In this lecture at first I will distinguish between private sector organizations and public sector organizations. Then I'll explain the roles of these two sectors in the mixed economy. At the same time, I'll discuss the aims of public sector organizations and private sector organizations. Later on, at the end of this lecture, I'll also discuss the market failure, the reasons for market failure, and the ways to overcome the market failure. Also, I'll explain in this chapter. Now, let me explain the presentation of today's lecture. All right, so at first, private sector organization. Private sector is the provision of goods and services by the business that are owned and controlled by individuals or group of individuals. In other words, private sector is the segment of national economy that is owned, controlled, and managed by private individuals or enterprises. The private sector is a significant segment of the country's economy with a major goal to earn money. The private sector organizations usually employs more people than the private sector organizations. Private sector companies are created by establishing a new enterprise or privatizing a former public organization. Individuals or groups of individuals are free to set up businesses and supply goods and services to anyone who wants to buy them in the private sector organization. In many countries, most consumer goods such as groceries, for example, food and other household items, and consumer durables. Consumer durables are those goods which have at least 3 years of lifetime from the date of purchase or production, are sold or provided by the private sector organizations in the economy. Now let me show you some examples of private sector organizations. In most countries, private sector businesses are relatively small and can vary in size and type of ownership. A minority business are large and some are multinationals also. So multinational businesses are those businesses which have operation in different countries. So multinational businesses are in the private sector. Private sector businesses include sole traders, partnerships, and companies. Now let me define these three types of private sector organizations. At first, sole trader. Sole trader is the business which is owned and controlled by one person is called sole trader. Partnership, the business which is owned and controlled by two or more people working together is known as partnership. Next is company. Company is a business which is owned by the shareholders and run by an elected board of directors on behalf of the shareholders. Now let me define public sector. So public sector is usually comprised of organizations that are owned and operated by the government and exist to provide services for its citizens. In other words, public sector organization is government organizations that provide goods and services in the economy. Similar to the voluntary sector, organizations in the public sector do not seek to generate profit. Most public sector services are provided for free by the state. Funding for public services are usually raised through different methods, including taxes, fees, and through financial transfers from other levels of government, for example, from a federal to a provincial or state government. In a public sector, a range of organizations such as government departments, public corporations, and other agencies provide services, for example, healthcare, education, defense, and other emergency services. Examples of public sector. Central government departments. Different departments, for example, Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Defense, etc., are usually controlled by teams or boards led by minister of the government. That means this type of public sector organizations is mainly the central government organizations. Next is public corporations and state-owned enterprises. A board of directors selected by the government runs these types of public sector organizations. The government provides capital to these organizations, but they are usually incorporated businesses. Incorporated businesses means these businesses have their own legal separate identity, although it is owned by the government. Next is the local authority services. Emergency services such as police or fire services, housing, such as council housing for homeless, etc. are provided by the local councils. Councillors elected by the residents in the local community run these local authorities. So these are the main three types of public sector organizations. Now let me explain the aims of private sector organizations. In private sector, the aims of the firms are likely to be determined by the owners. The main aim of most owners is to make a profit. However, a number of other aims need to be considered. Those aims are survival, profit maximization, growth, and social responsibility. First of all, survival. Many owners do not expect to make profit immediately when a farm is set up for the first time. The initial aim of a farm might be simply to survive. Survival is also important when trading conditions are difficult and the economic conditions also not favorable for the business. Next is profit maximization. Economic theory assumes that the rational producers, farms will aim to maximize their profits. This is where a farm will make as much profit as it possibly can in a period of time. Next aim of the private sector organization is growth. Many firms aim to grow because bigger businesses enjoy a number of advantages. For example, large firms can reduce average cost by exploiting economies of scale, which eventually increases the profit of the firms. The last aim of the private sector organizations is social responsibility. An increasing number of firms aim to be good corporate citizens by aiming to satisfy a wider range of stakeholders. For example, media, environmentalists, consumers, workers, local people, even the government. So by satisfying them, the firms want to increase their goodwill, and in this way they are trying to do their social responsibility, which is also known as corporate social responsibility, or CSR. Now, aims of the public sector. Public sector organizations have different aims from those in the private sector. Each organization in the private sector will have its own specific aims depending on the services they provide. However, there are some common aims, such as improve the quality of services. Generally, public sector organizations aim to improve the standard of their services because their aim is to maximize social welfare, not the maximization of the profit. So to maximize their social welfare, they can use the performance indicators may be used to monitor reliability, professionalism, levels of customer services, and speed of services. Minimizing cost. As government's resources are scarce, it is important to minimize waste. That is why the government is regularly looking for ways to cut costs in all ways. Next is allow for social cost and benefits. Public sector organizations are better placed to take into account the needs of a wide range of stakeholders. As a result, while making decisions, they can take into account external cost due to the negative externalities. Now let me explain the types of the economy. Different economies have different approaches to providing goods and services. Historically, a country's type of economically was shaped by its political ideology. From this viewpoint, we can categorize the economies in the world in three different categories. For example, market or free enterprise economy, command or planned economy, and mixed economy. Now let me explain at first market or free enterprise economy. This type of economy relies least on the public sector for the provision of goods and services. The vast majority are provided by the private sector. Resources are allocated through the market force. The role of the public sector is limited to providing a legal system, a monetary system, and providing key state services. Historically, the capitalist countries are adopting market economy. The most economically free countries in the world are often considered to be Singapore, Australia, and the USA. Next is command or planned economy. This type of economy relies entirely on the public sector to choose, produce, and distribute goods. All resources in planned economies belong to the government, and the state is responsible for planning, organizing, and coordinating the whole production process. There are few, if any, examples of planned economy in the world today. Cuba, Myanmar, and North Korea are the closest examples of planned or command economy nowadays. Next is mixed economy. A mixed economy means that part of the economy is left to the free market and part of it is managed by the government. Mixed economies start from the basis of allowing private enterprise to run most businesses. Then the governments intervene in the certain areas of the economy, such as providing public services and the regulation of private businesses. In reality, most economies are mixed with varying degrees of state intervention. Now, the role of private sector and public sector in mixed economy. We know that the basic economic problem is what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. To overcome this basic economic problem in the mixed economy, both private sector and public sector contribute together. Now let us look at what to produce. A mixed economy recognizes that consumers' goods such as food, clothes, leisure, entertainment, household services are best provided by the private sector. On the other hand, emergency services like education, street lighting, roads, defense, and protection, etc. are most likely to be provided by the public sector. Because private sector might fail to provide these goods and services in sufficient quantities. All right, now how to produce? In the private sector, to meet consumers' needs, firms will use production methods that help them to maximize quality and minimize cost. But public sector services will be provided by the government organizations, and they will decide how these services should be provided and attempt to supply them efficiently. Last is for whom to produce. The goods produced in the private sector are sold to anyone who can afford them. The market system is responsible for their allocation. In contrast, most public sector goods are provided for free to everyone and paid for from the taxes. Now let us move to the market failure. A market failure is a situation where free markets fail to allocate resources efficiently. That means if in the free market economy or mixed economy, if resources are not allocated efficiently, it is called the market failure. Overutilization, underutilization, overuse, less underuse. Okay, this is called the inefficiency of resources. Economists identify the following cases of market failure. Number one, negative externality. Consumers and producers may fail to take into account the effects of their actions on the third parties, such as car drivers, who may fail to take into account the traffic congestion by creating for others. So the people who are getting negatively affected by the car driver, it's called the negative externality, and this negative externality creates external cost which leads to market failure. Next is missing markets. Markets may fail to form, resulting in a failure to meet a need of want, such as the need for public goods, defense, street lighting, and highways, etc. These goods are under-provided by the private sector as they are so expensive, many people would not be able to afford them. This is called missing market. That means if public goods are under-provided by the private sector, it is called the missing market. This missing market leads to market failure. Next is information gap. Markets may not provide enough information because during a market transaction, it may not be in the interest of one party to provide full information to the other party. A lack of information may result wrong goods being purchased or produced. That means if there is lack of information, which is known as asymmetric information, in that case, consumers will not be able to purchase the their desired goods at desired price. At the same time, firms cannot sell their products at the desired price due to the lack of information, which will lead to the market failure. Next is lack of competition. A market may fail if there is no competition and it becomes dominated by one or small number of firms. In that case, the dominant firms may exploit consumers by charging higher prices and limiting choices, which will lead to market failure, because here firms will charge higher price, so consumers will have to pay. Will have to pay more. This is inefficient allocation of resources, so it will lead to market failure. Lastly, factor in mobility. If it is not possible to move the factors of production from one place to another place freely or from one use to another use, then it is called the market factor in mobility. Then if there is factor in mobility, then it will lead to market failure. Now let me discuss some ways to overcome the market failure. At first, business that impose externalities may be heavily regulated or fined by the government. If they are heavily regulated or fined by the government, then they will automatically reduce their negative externality. Hence, market failure is possible to overcome. Next is the government can use legislation to prevent market domination by few firms. If the firms are trying to dominate the market, the government will introduce legislation and new rules so that competition increases and market failure is possible to overcome in this way. Next is state money can be used to provide public goods and merit goods. Public goods are those goods which have two special characteristics: non-rivalry and non-excludability. So the government should produce these public goods to overcome the market failure, because these goods will be under provided by the private sector. And merit goods, those goods which have positive externality but under provided by the private sector. So the government should produce private goods and public goods and merit goods to overcome the market failure. Next is the government can force firms to provide more information. So this is the common tendency of the firms to hide information from the consumers. So in that case, the government will introduce new rules and strict rules so that firms are abide by the rules to provide information to the consumers. Lastly, the government may make some factors of production when it is immobile. So when it is immobile, if factors of production are immobile, it will lead to market failure. So the government can make the factors mobile so that firms can easily move the factors of production from one place to another place and from one use to another use. This is how the government can help to overcome the market failure. So dear students and viewers, this is all about the mixed economy. I hope this lecture will help you a lot to understand mixed economy. Thank you very much for joining me and being attentive.